How do I move past my best friend intentionally doing something they knew would upset me but they did it anyways? At 46 years old, I've been through my fair share of challenges, but the one constant source of comfort and unwavering support was always my husband, my best friend. He's 50 now, and for the past decade, he has been the cornerstone of my life, the one person I trusted without question. Or at least, that's how I felt until today. Now, I'm sitting here, grappling with an ache I never imagined he could cause. My thoughts are a tangled web of confusion and hurt, and no matter how I try to untangle them, I find myself lost without a clear solution. To some, this situation might seem minor, inconsequential even. He didn't betray me in the way that might immediately come to mind. There was no cheating, no dramatic uncovering of a hidden life. But in some ways, it feels just as devastating. What he did was far more subtle yet profoundly hurtful. He made a choice, a deliberate decision that disregarded my feelings entirely. And that, to me, is a betrayal of trust I'm struggling to comprehend. For the past few years, life has been a relentless storm of financial hardship. The kind of struggle that seeps into every corner of your existence, making even small moments of peace feel like stolen treasures. Together, we've fought to stay afloat, to ensure the bills are paid, and to keep the weight of unpaid dues from crushing us entirely. It hasn't been easy, far from it. For me, it's been an endless cycle of sacrifices. I've given up the things that brought me joy, the little luxuries that made life feel manageable, just to ensure that we could make it through each month. The toll it's taken on my mental health has been immense. Anxiety has become my unwelcome companion, its claws sinking deeper with every passing day. Panic attacks strike when I least expect them, leaving me gasping for air, my chest tight with a fear I can't escape. Every month brings the same gnawing dread. Will we make it? Will we have enough to cover everything this time? The fear is suffocating, a constant weight on my chest, a reminder that stability is a luxury we can no longer afford. We've tried to cut back, to minimize our spending wherever we can. Extravagances are a thing of the past, replaced by an endless grind of working 7 days a week. Rest is a luxury we can't afford. Our lives have become a constant hustle to make ends meet. Yet even in this, I've clung to the belief that we were in it together, that we were a team. That belief was my anchor, the thing that kept me grounded when the storm threatened to overwhelm me. But today, that anchor feels like it's slipped away, leaving me adrift. I keep replaying his actions over and over, trying to make sense of them, trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the one who would hurt me so carelessly. And no matter how I look at it, I can't escape the gnawing feeling of betrayal. This isn't just about the action itself, it's about what it represents. It's about trust, about respect, about the unspoken agreement that we were in this together, no matter how hard things got. Now, I'm left to wonder, how do you move past something like this? How do you repair the cracks in a foundation you thought was unbreakable? I don't have the answers. All I have is this aching void where trust used to be, and the overwhelming weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. The thing is, I'm not oblivious to what might be driving my husband's behavior. In my heart, I am nearly certain he has undiagnosed ADHD. I've read about it, I've seen the signs, and I've connected the dots. It's not just the inability to sit still or the difficulty focusing on one task, it's the impulsivity, the way he latches onto an idea with an intensity that borders on obsession. When he decides he needs something, it becomes an all-consuming urgency. There's no reasoning with him, no middle ground. If he spots a deal or a must-have item, it's as though the world will stop spinning unless he acts on it immediately. It's not always a bad thing. In some ways, that impulsiveness can be charming, even exciting. If we had the financial stability to cushion his whims, I would gladly indulge every one of his desires. I would never say no to him, because I know how deeply he feels things and how passionate he gets about his ideas. But we don't have that luxury. Every penny we spend is carefully measured, weighed against the mountain of responsibilities looming over us. There's no room for spontaneous purchases, no space for flights of fancy. And this is where my resentment begins to fester. I can forgive the impulsiveness, the sudden bursts of enthusiasm for the next big idea. What I struggle with is his inability or unwillingness to see what I've sacrificed. He doesn't see the endless list of things I've given up, the ways I've stripped my life of joy and comfort just to keep us afloat. He doesn't see how much the stress has taken from me, how it's hollowed me out and left me clinging to shreds of hope. When I try to talk to him about it, it's like throwing words into the void. He gets defensive, his voice rising as frustration bubbles over. It's as if he can't handle the weight of my feelings, so he throws them back at me like a tantruming child. He lashes out, accusing me of being unsupportive or overly critical, and the conversation inevitably spirals into the same tired argument. No resolution. No progress. Just me, left feeling unheard and more alone than ever. Last night was no different. He sent me an ad for a chainsaw he wanted to buy, a bright, shiny tool that he was convinced would solve all our problems. His plan was to use it to cut wood, which we could then sell to make money. On paper, it sounded like a great idea, and in the best-case scenario, it could have been a smart investment. But I've lived this cycle with him before. He gets these bursts of inspiration, diving headfirst into a project or scheme, only for it to fizzle out once the reality of the work sets in. He loses interest, or his health anxiety kicks in, and suddenly he's too sick or too overwhelmed to follow through. Still, I wanted to believe this time might be different. I wanted to support him, to meet him halfway. But the timing couldn't have been worse. I explained, as calmly as I could, that for the next couple of weeks, we were walking a financial tightrope. If he was going to buy the chainsaw, we needed to see immediate results. He needed to use it right away, get the wood cut and sold, and replace the money he spent. His response, though, was the same deflating refrain I've heard 100 times before. "I don't know if my body will stand up to the labor," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I just don't think I can handle it." Then, as if to justify the purchase, he went on about how he had already promised the seller he would buy it. It was as if his word to a stranger outweighed the financial strain it would place on us or the stress it would cause me. I sat there, watching him justify his decision, my heart sinking with every word. This wasn't just about the chainsaw. It was about the pattern, the endless loop of impulsivity and disregard for the bigger picture. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected: anger. Not just frustration or disappointment, but a deep, simmering anger at the realization that he couldn't or wouldn't put my feelings and our shared struggles ahead of his own desires. This wasn't the first time I'd heard this routine, and deep down, I knew it wouldn't be the last. He gets these bursts of inspiration, these grandiose ideas that he convinces himself are solutions to all our problems. And at the start, I believe him, or I want to. I try to muster the optimism, try to see the potential in his plans, because maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. But the reality is always the same. The enthusiasm fizzles out as soon as the work begins, or his health anxiety swoops in like a dark cloud, convincing him he's too unwell to follow through. It's an exhausting cycle, one that leaves me feeling drained and disillusioned every single time. So, when he sent me the ad for the chainsaw, I braced myself. The idea wasn't terrible. In fact, it made sense in theory. Cutting wood to sell could bring in some much-needed extra cash, and I was willing to support the venture. But I've learned to temper my expectations with him. I've learned that his ideas often live and die in the space between impulse and action. So, I tried to be practical about it, laying out the terms as clearly as I could. I told him, if you're going to buy this chainsaw, it has to be worth it. We don't have room for mistakes right now. The money for it has to be replaced immediately within the next couple of weeks. If we're tight on bills, this purchase could push us into a dangerous spot. So, if you're serious about this, the work needs to start right away. But instead of reassurance, instead of a promise to take this seriously and see it through, he gave me the same excuses I've heard too many times before. I don't know if my body will stand up to the labor, he said, his tone already wavering with self-doubt. I just don't think I can handle it. And then, as if to sidestep the entire issue, he launched into a justification that made my stomach twist. He had already promised the guy he'd buy the saw. That was the tipping point. His word to a stranger held more weight than the very real financial strain it would cause us, more weight than the stress it piled onto my already overburdened shoulders. He brushed past my concerns as if they were secondary, as if my sacrifices and the precarious balance of our budget were trivial compared to his momentary impulse. It wasn't just frustrating, it was infuriating. I could feel the anger bubbling up, not just at his behavior, but at the pattern it represented. This wasn't new. This was a familiar dance, one where he'd leap headfirst into something without considering the consequences, leaving me to pick up the pieces when it inevitably fell apart. It was the same story, a different day, and I was growing tired of being the one who had to clean up the mess. I tried to bite my tongue, to keep the frustration from spilling over into an argument that would go nowhere. But it was hard to stay silent when he was so blind to the impact of his actions. How could he not see what this did to me? How could he not understand that every impulsive decision, every half-finished project, every unfulfilled promise added another layer to the mountain of stress I was already carrying? And yet, here we were again. He didn't even hear me. Not really. He didn't hear the urgency in my voice, the plea for him to see things from my perspective. Instead, he was locked in his own world, justifying his actions and brushing off my concerns as if they were background noise. I felt the familiar sense of defeat settling in. What was the point of explaining myself, of trying to make him understand, when I knew it would end the same way it always did? He'd dig in his heels, throw a tantrum, and I'd be left feeling more isolated and unheard than before. It was a cycle I didn't know how to break, and the weight of it all was beginning to feel unbearable. Here's where everything changed, where he hurt me in a way I never thought possible. After 10 years of marriage, after a decade of believing we were a team, he got up early one morning, without a word, and went to buy the chainsaw. He didn't care about my feelings. He didn't care about the precarious state of our finances or next week's bills. In that moment, all that mattered to him was his own impulse and a promise he made to a stranger. The betrayal wasn't in the chainsaw itself. It was in the choice he made, the choice to prioritize his wants over the life we've been struggling to hold together. He disregarded my sacrifices, my fears, my relentless efforts to keep us afloat. It was a deliberate decision, and it shattered something in me I didn't even realize could break. The anger came first, hot and raw, boiling just beneath the surface. I felt betrayed and disrespected in a way that words could barely capture. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake, it was a choice he made, knowing full well what it would mean for me. And then came the helplessness, the sense of being cornered with no way out. What could I even say? If I tried to explain my feelings, it would only spiral into another argument, another round of defensiveness and excuses. We'd been down that road too many times, and it always ended the same way, with me feeling more alone than ever. So, I shut down. I couldn't look at him, couldn't even bring myself to speak. The sight of him felt like a reminder of everything I'd been trying to hold together, now crumbling because of one selfish decision. I don't think he even realizes I know he bought it. Or maybe he does, and he's just waiting for the inevitable fight. Either way, the weight of it all is suffocating. Part of me knows this behavior isn't entirely his fault. I truly believe his undiagnosed ADHD is at the root of it. The impulsivity, the inability to fully consider consequences, it all fits. But the problem is, he refuses to acknowledge it. To him, ADHD is a weakness, a label he's unwilling to accept. He won't even entertain the idea, let alone seek help or strategies to manage it. And that leaves me in this impossible position, trying to make sense of his actions while knowing he's unlikely to change. What makes it even harder is that he isn't a bad man. Far from it. He has qualities that make him an incredible partner, qualities that made me fall in love with him in the first place. He's loyal to a fault, never once looking at another woman. He wants to spend time with me, genuinely enjoys my company. He loves animals, and his care for family is unmatched. And his mechanical skills? They've been a godsend, saving us money in ways I can't even begin to count. But for all those good qualities, there's a blind spot he just can't or won't see. He doesn't understand the weight of the stress I carry, the sleepless nights I endure trying to figure out how to make ends meet. He doesn't see the toll it's taken on my mental health or how close I am to breaking. He knows I'll figure it out, like I always do. And maybe that's the most painful part, that he relies on my strength without ever truly acknowledging the cost. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know how to rebuild the trust that feels so irreparably damaged. I'm not even sure if I can. What I do know is that something has to change, because I can't keep living like this, caught between loving the man he is and resenting the choices he makes.